Get ready for another exciting episode of Unscripted Pivots, where we dive into the transformative moments that shape our lives and careers. I'm your host, Danielle Sprouls, also known as the WTF Lady, where WTF stands for Women That Flourish. We're all about helping you navigate life's experiences, the unexpected turns, and come out stronger on the other side. Today, I'm excited to introduce our amazing guest, Frawn Morgan. Frawn is a strategic and critical thinker with a knack just to see the big picture while honing in on solutions that make a real difference. As a corporate strategist and fractional executive, she's worked with top tier clients, drawing on decades of experience as a business owner, a C suite executive, and an independent fiduciary to institutional investors. Frawn's impressive career includes advising institutional investors and major real estate asset owners, guiding them through everything from investor acquisitions and asset management to litigation management and capital sourcing. She's been at the helm of major master planned communities and overseen a multi-billion-dollar real estate investment portfolio for the largest public pension fund in the United States. But that's not all. Recently, I have to take a breath when I'm speaking about this woman. Recently, Frawn earned her Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership. So yes, we have a doctor in the house. She also holds a Master of Applied Psychology, a Master's of Organizational Communication, and an undergraduate degree in Social Science, plus a certificate in Personal Development Coaching. She's all that. Her doctoral research focused on improving the well-being of working mothers, showing her dedication to making a positive impact both professionally and personally. Join us as we chat with Dr. Frawn Morgan about her incredible journey, the pivotal moments that have shaped her career, and her insights into creating impactful change in business development. Welcome, Dr. Frawn Morgan.
Wow.
I'm going to clap. I'm so excited to have you on here. I always begin by letting everybody know how I know my guest. And Frawn and I met when I recently moved to California in 2017, maybe it was 2018, that I found my way into the Women's Leadership Initiative, which is part of a larger global organization called Urban Land Institute. And we were both council members. And you have to be chosen for that. So it's kind of cool. And we worked on programs together. And for 3 years, we were just really dialed in, and she added so much value. And we have stayed friends ever since. And I just so enjoy your company, Frawn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Danielle. That was a very illustrious introduction. And I also have really enjoyed our friendship and just appreciate the ability to connect with brilliant women like you. And now, we're both in another unscripted pivot and a transition that we're exploring. And I just love this opportunity to talk with you.
No, it's terrific. So recently, Frawn and I were asked to speak. We were co-presenting in front of the council where we first met, the Women's Leadership Initiative. And it was really, really cool. And we were kind of brainstorming, what would we want to talk about? And we decided I think our topic was navigating change, women that flourish in transition. And a lot of Frawn's doctoral work and the work prior to that in schooling and her education was around, motherhoods, careers, and whatnot. So I want to begin with that. We'll touch about a lot on transition in general, but I want to begin with some of the work that incited you to further your education to the degree you did, because that was quite the undertaking. So let's talk about that.
Thanks, Danielle. So I need to probably bring a little bit of background to this. And that was, I started in the real estate development industry decades ago in the late 70s. So, and, it was an industry not particularly friendly to women, but I loved it. And I had actually, just prior to that, dropped out of college to have a baby. So fast forward decades in this industry, and when I put my youngest child, who is now 34, in college, I took a breath and I said, okay, I think it's my turn now. It's time for me to go back to school. I was running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm and had tens, dozens, at one point over 100 people, in teams that I was managing.
Wow.
And I thought, I really need to do this not because I want to finish the accounting degree I had started, but because I wanted to finish school and have a college degree. I struggled over what to do. There were, the obvious options, business administration, the interesting option of legal studies, but then social science popped out. And I thought, wow, that's kind of history and society and policy. And it sounded really interesting to me. During that first experience, which I started in 2011, I started to research the gender pay gap. And
Mm.
that led me very quickly to the motherhood penalty, where I learned from an academic perspective about how much working mothers are penalized in our organizational systems, our business systems. And that got me all riled up.
I don't think so. I got to dig into this. Yeah, because it is a problem that's persisted for many decades.
It
So,
is. And the flip side of that is the fatherhood bonus. Women, for some reason, when they have children, are perceived of as less dedicated to their jobs, which is, nothing could be further from the truth, but men are perceived as more dedicated. And so it really widens this disparity between the two from a career perspective. So that got me really interested in the plight, and I'll call it the plight of working moms, because working mothers do have not only their primary job, which they get paid for, but they also have their unpaid second shift job of all the domestic responsibilities. And so I started looking at women and their well-being. When I finally got into the Master's of Applied Psychology program, I wanted to explore that from a psychological perspective. So my research in that program was around the correlation between maternal employment, working moms or moms who work, and adolescent depression. I really wanted to understand if there was a connection. And I have to say, this was not a popular topic with my classmates, with several of my instructors. One, Angela Duckworth, who many of your listeners will recognize, had to approve, my research project. And Angela just goes, "Oh, there's no connection, but if you want to research it, go ahead." And which I thought was really interesting, because Angela is all about resilience and building resilience.
Why do you think there was that reluctance when you look back at it?
Well, I think because many of my classmates, I was fortunately not the oldest person in class. I was the second to oldest person in class, but most of my classmates were, say, in their mid-30s. And a lot of them were women. I would say it was probably a 65 or 70% women cohort, female cohort. And I think a lot of them had strong, rewarding careers, and they wanted to have families. And I think there was kind of this underlying concern that I would find a correlation that would make them want to not pursue their career and raise a family. I really think that was the
That's
bottom
really
line.
interesting, because my first thought was that that would incite them to make sure that they were trailblazing the rest of us in the right direction, because awareness is everything. So that's interesting. I thought it would have been like, oh, and things have changed. Certainly when
Yeah,
you were
things have
working and
changed. And
when
and
I
you're
was
right,
working and
awareness
raising my
is
kids.
everything.
But we need to perpetuate and expand the differences that have occurred over time. So that's interesting. So it was almost like you were being somewhat silenced, or just like not encouraged to unearth that entire thing. So you're out there and you're looking to see if there's a correlation between working mothers, which, by the way, I think is a very redundant term, because if you're in the house, you're working harder. I did that for a stint. Yeah. So, but moms who are working outside the home, and childhood depression, whether or not their children were depressed. And what did you find when you did that research?
Yes, so it was actually quite interesting, because I wasn't sure what I was going to find. And the first thing I found is that there's not much in the academic literature canon on this subject.
Mhm.
There's not many people who have studied it, and I spoke with some psychologists that are very well known in studying family dynamics and studying depression, and they all told me, there really isn't much out there about that. That just encouraged me to look a little bit deeper. And what I did find is that there is a very strong correlation between mothers who are depressed and
Mhm.
their children being depressed. So it's almost, if you're a mother who is struggling with depression, working or not, was not um, classified by employed or unemployed
Mhm.
outside the home. If you're a mother who's struggling with depression, there is a better than even chance that your children will also struggle with depression. So that was really interesting to me and inspiring, because what that told me was that my desire, my drive to understand how to help working mothers build their well-being was crucial. And it's kind of what spurred me on to the next step, which was trying to continue that research. And the best way to do that for me was to embark on a doctoral program.
That's it's so interesting to me because you're recognizing right out of the gate the ripple effect that it has. So if a mother who's working outside the home is not, attending to her well-being and she's suffering from depression or things along those lines, that's going to kind of just like permeate the entire family. And
Yeah.
so you're doing a service not just to her by doing this research and coming up with the strategies to combat it, but also helping the family that she's the caretaker of. Right. What occurs to me too is like, obviously, moods are contagious. And I think that they'll tell you that, what is that saying that says, we're as happy as mom or something like that? Like, like that, if mom's not happy, nobody's happy. Certainly
Right.
hubby's not happy, right? But, it goes beyond, mood and whatnot. I mean, there might be a genetic component to that depression that a child inherits because that really is a medical condition that we can't discount, right? So it's not just like an attitude or an exhaustion or whatnot. I mean, there's like, physiological differences that occur in people that are, clinically depressed. But it really is cool that you, in your research, because we've already talked about it, so I know a little bit about what your findings were, that in fact, that depression, children aren't depressed, right? The way that we thought that would be correlated to the mom. And I will tell you, when I went back to work after being a stay-at-home mom for about 8 years, everybody was worried about the children. And I could see that because a lot of my friends were just, they stayed home and, that couldn't understand why I wanted to resurrect a career and be gone the way I was. But I knew right coming from the gate that I would be a better mother if I was fulfilling that need that I had because the need was very, very strong to work outside the house, having spent all that time going to law school and investing in myself only to turn around almost immediately and stay home and, continue to populate the family, 4 kids. I spent the entire 90s having children and greatest thing I've ever done, my greatest accomplishment. But I was really starting to feel, frustrated and lonely. I was yearning, and not everybody has to yearn for an outside career. They don't, not the mother, not the father. I mean, somebody's got to pay the bills, but so I felt so strongly about that, and I knew that I would be a better parent outside the house than a depressed one inside, you know? So all the work that you've done, it really just fascinates me. So,
Thank you. So you hit on a couple really important points. And since that time that I did that initial research into the correlation between maternal employment and childhood depression, there has been some research published. It was actually published in 2019,
mhm,
longitudinal research that looked at the adult outcomes of children who were raised by working mothers. And I'm happy to share that research with you if you're interested, or share a link to, a popular article that was written about that research. And there is one on my website as well. But the important thing about that was it showed that children who were raised by working mothers had better adult outcomes overall and in general than their peers raised by stay-at-home moms. Not, I'm not disparaging the stay-at-home moms, because this research was absolutely about the children raised by working mothers. But what it told us was that children raised by working mothers were generally better developed emotionally. They were more likely to, the boys, interestingly enough, were more likely to marry women that wanted or had a career. They were supportive of their spouses' career aspirations. The women that were raised by working mothers were more likely to be in manager or supervisory or even executive roles, or be business owners themselves. So those outcomes are all very positive. Plus, what we know about well-being, and I'll use that just as a term, well-being.
Mhm.
Well-being has been defined by Marty Seligman, or the components of well-being have been defined by an acronym called PERMA, and that stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning or purpose, and accomplishment. 3 of those elements, engagement, meaning and purpose, and accomplishment, are directly related to a woman's experience when she works outside the home. So boosting those 3 elements is automatically going to have a positive impact on overall well-being. And then when you add in the relationships that are formed when you're working outside the home and the positive emotion that can come from those relationships, it's easy to understand how a woman pursuing a career that she finds rewarding and engaging would be nothing but positive for her own well-being, and that her positive well-being is positively impacting her children.
It's so interesting to me what came up when you were talking about the sons and compared to the daughters. I mean, as a blanket statement, I will say that a woman that chooses to have a career and work outside the home, she at least gives evidence to her children that this is possible. Now, as it pertains to the sons, what I think is really great is that it helps to disrupt this traditional, dismissing of women. So sons that are raised by working women are raised with the awareness that women are capable and that they're strong. And when you are watching somebody that you love, like your mom, accomplish these things, when you two end up in a workplace, you can approach that culturally a little bit different than probably the older generations that were not exposed to that. So that becomes really important for the sons to see. And also, for the daughters to know, at least at the very least, they have a choice. They have a choice. They have evidence that somebody else has done it. And so the importance of that cannot be understated. I think that's really great. Now, as wonderful as all of this is, and it's so positive, that does not mean, and we both know this firsthand, that that makes it easy. It is not easy. It is not easy. I think that one of the best things that somebody can do is, consider who their partner is in life, who they're married to, because you need to have support along those lines. And that's a two-way street. I'm not just saying, it's more important who the woman marries, but certainly that's going to set the tone. That said, even though we have all this positivity, there is something, and I want to dive into this because I know you've studied this and you have a lot of great things to say about it. There is something called guilt. Okay. Okay, everybody says we can do this and we're doing it, but then there's guilt. And when we did our presentation, I had, seen an acronym, kind of like Googled, like, how could I be like, snazzy about this? And I want to read it because I think it is kind of cool. So guilt, GUILT, giving unnecessary internal lectures to yourself. Okay. I mean, we had a slide up there, we put that up there, and it just visually and just like, grammatically, like looked like, yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. But I know that you have done some studies around guilt. So tell our listeners the types of guilt, and let's take a look at that because it's really important, because awareness is everything. You can't fix a problem that you don't know you have, right?
Right.
So let's talk about
Awareness
that.
is everything.
Yeah.
And yes, my last cycle of research in my doctoral studies was specifically around maternal guilt, because it popped up as just the number one thing in the research, the first 2 cycles of research. So initially I went out, I talked to, interviewed, and surveyed 142 women and accumulated those or aggregated those results and looked at some very specific things. Before I talk about what I looked at, I want to make the note that I did this research during 2020, during the COVID global pandemic and the shutdown that we were all experiencing. I didn't plan it that way. I actually applied to the Institutional Review Board at my university in January of 2020 with all of my research materials. And by the time I received research approval, the world had shut down. So at that point, I took a step back. I retooled the research. I redesigned the survey because I wanted to capture what was happening. We didn't know what was happening in March or April, but I thought this is important. I need to capture it. So I added a number of questions that were specific to what these women were feeling. At this point, I wasn't even thinking about maternal guilt. I was just trying to determine their levels of well-being, to create a baseline. But when I added these questions in, a lot of them had to do with COVID. Overwhelmed, frustrated, exhausted, lonely, not enough emotional support. I mean, these were the things that kind of came out of that. But the number one answer, 85% of the respondents said they struggled daily, periodically, regularly with maternal guilt. And that was just this giant bright light. And I said, okay, I need to look into maternal guilt. So here's what I found. First off, there's very little research into guilt.
Again, you're a pioneer, Dr. Frawn.
Yeah, we're not going to go there. And there's actually very little research. Brene Brown has done a great job in shame, which guilt can, if it's not checked, morph into shame. But guilt itself, not a lot of research, and virtually none into maternal guilt. So there is some very recent research, however, on predisposition towards guilt. And what that found is that women are several times more predisposed to feelings of guilt than are men. And these feelings start in adolescence. So girls as young as 11, that was the youngest that participated in this particular research, but girls as young as 11 are already developing what I like to call the guilt gene. You know, I used to think that it just switched on when you had a baby, but now, you know, there is a cultural move toward guilt for women, and it's starting in adolescence. So that's a much larger cultural conversation that needs to be addressed by the social psychologist, the moral psychologist, and you know, I don't know how to address that aspect of it, but I did want to really focus on the maternal guilt, because maternal guilt is pervasive, it's insidious, it affects every decision a woman makes. And going back to some of my earlier research into schedule flexibility, maternal guilt not only impacts a woman's decision of, you know, what career, what job, what company to work for, what industry, but what we know about schedule flexibility is that women who have children at home are not necessarily job loyal or even company loyal or even industry loyal, because they're chasing flexibility. They're trying to balance and manage everything. And what we call that in psychology speak is role strain. But that role strain creates feelings of guilt. And so the really pervasive thing about maternal guilt is that most maternal guilt is the result of a failure to live up to a self-imposed expectation, which, you know, if you're if you're a mom, not to mention the fact if you're a driven, career woman, we impose lots of expectations on ourselves. And I would say probably most of them are unrealistic.
Yeah,
And
I would
so
agree.
when we don't fulfill those expectations, we feel guilty. But this isn't authentic guilt. There's no remedy for this guilt. We can't, you know, fix somebody's car when we backed into it in a parking lot, or buy your girlfriend a new sweater when you spilled a glass of wine on it. This isn't authentic guilt. This is guilt from self-imposed expectations. So that's the guilt that I really wanted to address in the last cycle of my research. Can we mitigate guilt from these self-imposed expectations?
Yeah, and again, we'll go back to awareness. First, we have to be aware of the differences. So when you articulate it like that, it becomes obvious that a lot of this is self-imposed. It's not like an incident that happened. And then to talk about how this is a foundation that has been building since preteen years. This is a long time in the making. This isn't like just pop out a baby and then all of a sudden feel guilty about balancing two aspects of your life that are very, very important to you. And probably, no, not probably, the personal side being the most important. And how does it share this space without, compromising your career trajectory, which you invested in? And it all depends when, what point in your life and how invested time you've had in your career. It's astonishing to me how many women just it's so like they're self-lashing themselves and they
Mm-hmm.
beat themselves up, and the self-talk that exists. It's one of the things that really prompted me into coaching, or even just launching this podcast in general, because there is another way of thinking. We can reframe our thinking, and it's not to say that guilt will be completely obliterated. There's always going to be a little bit about, but let's put it in perspective, and let's set up some boundaries for ourselves that are healthy, that we can honor and exercise, and to lower those expectations. Like you said, the words here that are real critical is self-imposed,
Right.
self-imposed, right? So how do we get outside of self? So what were some of the strategies and thoughts that would mitigate the damage from what really is a bit of a crisis?
Yeah, yeah. So that was my focus, is mitigating the negative impact from this maternal guilt over self-imposed, unrealistic expectations. And you're right, awareness is number one. And so the very first thing I taught the women who participated in the last cycle, which was a 6-week-long workshop, the very first thing I taught them was the concept of awareness. First of all, being able to, number one, say, oh, this is guilt that I'm feeling. This is guilt that's driving me to make this decision or make this choice or look at it this way. But then to take that guilt and say, is this real, authentic guilt? Or is this guilt from an expectation I've imposed on myself? So that's number one. And what we call that in psychological speak is affect labeling. And when you label your emotion, whether it's guilt or frustration or anger or, whatever emotion
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling, that automatically starts the emotional regulation process. We're not even aware of it. But we're not even aware of the process. But when we become aware of the emotion, then we can start to process and deal with it. So that was absolutely number one. But then how do we process and deal with it? Okay, I'm feeling guilty because I worked 10 hours today, and although I was going to make this wonderful home-cooked meal for my family, I'm exhausted, and so we're going to McDonald's. I've done that. And
Yeah,
as
who
I'm
hasn't?
in the drive-through line going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm feeding my children McDonald's, and I put myself through this guilt trip. And so it's being able to arrest yourself in that moment and say, wait a minute. First of all, it's unrealistic to think you can do everything that Superwoman could do. But then secondly, to be kind to yourself. And
Oh
so
yeah.
mitigating those feelings absolutely requires a level of self-compassion that, especially for, a driven woman or a busy woman with a career and kids, is like, I mean, how can I take the time to be kind to myself, to be compassionate to myself? But it's crucial because
Yeah,
primary remedy for guilt is forgiveness. Now, that's easier when when you can ask for forgiveness and get forgiveness from someone else. But now you have to be able to forgive yourself. And that's harder. And that requires self compassion. So
absolutely. And
we
we're
move
definitely not
into,
schooled to do that. I mean, we weren't historically. I mean, it's probably changed a little bit. And I'm reflecting on when I was raising my kids. And, I think I did put that at the forefront to some degree, but it wasn't something that I was necessarily familiar with for myself because it wasn't how I was raised. And I just think that, it's not that my parents didn't want me, I imagine, to want to forgive myself for whatever reason, but it was always about forgiving others and being patient, and growing up in, Catholicism and just being mindful that you had to have a moral compass intact and, apologize for every single thing that you may have done wrong. And so, and I think women just even in general, religion aside, I'm not going to make it about religion, we say I'm sorry about everything. Like it almost seems like to just be something that comes out of our mouths. You could bump into somebody when you're walking into an office building, and then the first thing is like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Right? Is that really guilt language? I'm not sure, but I just know that it's literally like we're raised to respond in such a way as though we're being apologetic for things, as
right.
though it was our responsibility or our fault, or there was some crazy intention, right? It just, I've seen workshops done on the words "I'm sorry," like, don't say you're sorry, and I'm thinking, well, is that nice? Yeah, it's crazy. It's just some wiring that has to be rewired,
Mhm.
reframed, and to get to that place of mental well-being where all things flourish on the other side. It also requires a growth mindset. Just because it was done a certain way for a long time doesn't mean it is right
Mhm.
or that it should be perpetuated. Right. So I love
Right.
that you do the deep dive, and that what starts coming to the surface for you is all of these really unresearched topics that are very weighty. And it's really incredible. I celebrate that you do the work to find out, and you're publishing things. And it really, I mean, you did this so late in life. I mean, okay, well, I'm in awe of all of it. I want to jump into transition, but I don't want to be premature. If you had some more things to talk about in terms of, the guilt, the self-imposed, and the authentic. Um,
I think just one more thing, and you brought it up, Danielle. We've been socially conditioned to respond, we as women, to respond in a certain way, to take responsibility, to apologize for things that not only are not our fault, but we had no point or no part
mhm.
in creating. And it's just kind of the culturally acceptable thing to do. And the issue with that is that, our psyche is listening to our words every
Yes.
second.
Mhm.
Everything that we say gets processed in our minds and becomes part of us. And it almost is like we're negatively programming ourselves to be sorry, to be guilty, to be
Mhm.
responsible. And it is a tough habit to break. But I think we have to, again, in the awareness space, we have to be aware of what we're telling ourselves and recognize when we are telling ourselves something that is not positive and generative to our well-being.
Mhm. And that takes some practice. That's probably some
Mm,
uncomfortable, awkward practice to do the
yes.
opposite, to do the contrary action involved. So we've talked about, the motherhood, the working mother, and that obviously is an enormous transition. But there's other transitions, right, that people in general navigate, and that has more to do with career transition and the conclusion of something that maybe we were doing for a very long time, and then embarking on new, right? The pivots, right? Some
Mhm.
of them unscripted, some of them not so much. But you and I also hold court in that space where we were both doing something for a couple of decades, full time, full blown, full force, full everything, right? And now are not. And I believe that you are like me in that you didn't know it was going to happen when it happened. In as much as you knew, we all know that at some point we're going to, quote unquote, retire or, redirect our focus. But then sometimes it comes before we had planned to do so. And we experience that unscripted pivot. And I want to chat about that. And I want to share, my experiences, and I want to hear about yours.
Sure. I think first I want to preface this by just talking about something that I believe to be true. I've done any research around it, but as women, today we're living in an unbelievably positive age. I have had the fantastic opportunity to have a nearly 5-decade career in one field. And 20 years ago, I'd be like sitting at home watching TV, eating bonbons, maybe playing a little golf. But here I am at 67 and just really envisioning a complete pivot and doing things, mainly this working mother research and writing and speaking and publishing on well-being topics that is just completely different. And I just think it's remarkable that we are living in an age where we have the opportunity to do that. As women, we are living longer, we are vital longer. We're taking better care of ourselves. We're recognizing the importance of our well-being in our continued flourishing. And I think it's just a really exciting time. So that's kind of the preface, because like I was you're not in your 60s yet, I don't think, or you're just turning 60.
Sniffing the door. I'm sniffing the door.
But here I was in my
it's happening in August. Everybody sent me a present August 6th.
The big 6-0.
So just 6-0 on August 6th. There we go.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to be in Montana, as a side note, with my children and John, and I am so happy. I'm going to take that day in with big smiles. It's all good. So I'm sorry. So we're in the same decade.
Like you said, you know that it's coming at some point. You don't know when it's coming, and then all of a sudden you just go, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing? I have other things I want to do. I was deep in the middle of trying to write my dissertation. I was kind of all over the place mentally, and it just seemed like the right time, for me to take the exit route and do that. It gave me the mental space and clarity to finish my dissertation, which took, far too long to write. But get that done and finish the doctorate and defend my research, get the funny hat, all the stuff that goes along with that. So it's been a huge transition. But to your point about the unscripted, aside from finishing my dissertation, which was, as Stephen Covey would say, important and urgent, because I was paying tuition for every semester that I was continuing to write. So there was a monetary urgency as well as just an urgency on my own. I was urging myself to get this finished. But aside from focusing on that, I really hadn't kind of prepared a plan. And so I'm still in this unscripted pivot wasteland bubble where I'm trying to figure out what's next. And it's an interesting time for me because I have always been a planner, and I've always created my timeline, and I know, what comes after this, then this, then this. And now I'm not there. I'm just kind of letting it happen. So
I think probably experience. Like the biggest change for me is the lack of structure, because you're not attached to a team or, a corporate identity or even that brand. And so now that really is something that you need to give birth to yourself. Right. And that's both liberating and daunting depending upon any given day. And for me, there's certain things that I now take on that used to be part of, like, let's say, the marketing department or the admin skills, those Excel spreadsheets, things that I never paid too much attention because they were being taken care of and I was being deployed to go sell. So, I mean, I did my role and I did it well, but I didn't do their role and I didn't really tap into their role. And today I have to live part of their role. So the learning curve is there. And I will tell you, I am absolutely loving it. One of the reasons that I had this big pivot was, to your point, at some point we want to do something other than exactly what we're doing. I wanted to do a couple of things at the same time, and I was really prevented from doing so just more because of the laws that here exist in California around the industry I was in. And when that gets uncomfortable enough that you are willing to make the changes so that you aren't living, I don't know, such a small life, I guess to say.
Hmm.
I don't think I ever really want to walk away from title insurance or commercial real estate overall. I just knew that being attached to that role was going to prevent me from being on boards, which at this stage in my career, I yearned to do things like that, do public speaking. There was a lot of things and nuances that I was not going to be able to enjoy and take advantage of. And so I just saw my growth being stunted. I'm still very much part of the commercial real estate community, as are you. I mean, our network is well established. Think about it, Frawn. There is so much that goes with being a person who has like the seasoned, existence. I mean, we know a lot. Our work ethic has been established. Our network exists. And you know what? We're pretty darn smart in a lot of areas because of it. But more than that, we are less tolerant for living in discomfort. So whether that's going to be a relationship in the professional realm or in the personal space, it's like, yeah, I got no time for that. So this is what I'm going to say to all the women out there that, are approaching any kind of new decade. Just know that you are going to be stronger and better for it on the other side. Don't worry so much about what you see in the mirror. I want you to search for what you're going to be seeing within you, not just in your heart, but the fortitude and the resilience that is built over time. You cannot purchase that. You have to earn it. We talk in terms of not years, but we talk in terms of miles. Okay, so you are at mile marker 67. I will be at mile marker 60, August 6th. And we are ahead. Okay, you're ahead of me. You are winning right now. I am behind you. Okay, so yes, this is something to be embraced and celebrated. I mean that with all my heart, especially when we have the good health and the energy and the mindset behind it. This is really only the beginning of so much more. What I'm enjoying is that I'm less I don't know if I would say the word distracted, but responsible to do certain things that was not going to enable me to do the things that I really want to do. Right? Now, you got to make money at doing some of these things. And so then it becomes about the fractional work and being an executive. But we have a lot to offer. Right. So, and the networking is extremely important, not just to grow the business, but I think for me to check in with my community of women, to know that when I'm feeling high, I got some good vibes to share. And when I'm feeling low or scared, I've got a support place that will cut that in half. Okay. You pick up the phone and you have a conversation and you just get rigorously honest with yourself. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, she's laughing. She's laughing at it. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm in my head. I'm just in my head, so get out of your head and get into community. Yeah, transition is a big thing, whether you're a man or a woman. We obviously experience things, some things very differently. And you
Sure.
touched beautifully upon the motherhood part. And yeah, take us out. Is there anything else that you want to share that you think that the audience should know before we wrap this up?
Wow. I think as a society, we're becoming more aware of the importance of personal and individual well-being,
Yeah.
not just to ourselves, but to all of those around us. We learned during COVID the importance of connection, the importance of relationships, and even the importance of casual connections, such as talking to someone in the grocery store or the barista making your coffee, saying hi to the Amazon delivery person. I think we experienced a real dearth of that during COVID. And I think it reawakened in many people the recognition that people need people. Now, that's an
Yeah.
old cliche, but it's true. We do need people and we do need other people. And, the most important thing in well-being from the research that I've done and the research that many other people have done is that relationships are key.
Yeah.
And so anything that we can do and anything that I can do to improve the relationships of working moms that they have with others, and especially the mother-child relationship, I just think is really useful work and where I want to put my energies.
I love it. Well, we'll have your website and all the contact information in the show notes for anybody who wants to reach out to you and further explore not only what you've learned or contribute to your future work, and the work that you're doing. I can't say enough good things about you, Dr. Frawn. I'm so happy that you were able to pop in and on a Saturday, no less. Yeah, guys, she was really kind. She just like given up some time on her weekend. It's so good to see you as always, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future. I think this
Thank
is
you.
the beginning of some big stuff. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for your time, Danielle, today. I loved it.